Good evening, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to another episode of the Berean Torah study. Tonight we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 1 and verses 10 through 20. And I've got a lot of material here, so I hope we can get it all in 45 minutes to an hour, but we'll see how that goes anyway. All right. We saw in verses 1 through, about 1 through 9, that John had introduced himself, John, an apostle, a servant of Yeshua, and then we saw that Yeshua introduced himself, and so now we're starting to get into the message of it all, and to who these people are that they're actually writing to. So let's go ahead and we'll start it up. Revelation 1 and 10. I was in the Ruach, or the Spirit, on the day of the Lord, and I heard behind me a loud voice like that of a trumpet. Now, when we talk about in the Spirit, that's kind of an unusual phrase that we would have. And for John, it was probably at this point a unique spiritual experience. We're not talking about where walking in the Spirit, or walking, just being an experience with the Holy Spirit, but he's just saying he was in the Spirit. And to me, what this does is it's talking a little bit more about like a very unique spiritual experience for John. We do know that it's mentioned 3 more times in Revelation, and I gave you the references there of where it's in heaven, in the wilderness, and on the mountain of God. Each time he says, "And I was in the Spirit." So it may very well be that what he was talking about here is something similar to what Paul the apostle had talked about going up into the into heaven, and he said, "I don't know, if I was in the body or the Spirit, or how it happened, but there I saw those things." And so perhaps we could actually call this an out-of-body experience, or just something where he was so caught up by the Spirit of God that he was not aware of his physical surroundings where he was there on the island of Patmos, and perhaps that he was so fully engulfed in this Spirit that he was actually in another realm that is more than just the physical realm, that he was actually in another sphere, I guess you'd say. And then he said, on the Lord's day, and the Lord's day. Now we really don't know for sure what John was talking about there on the Lord's day. We can kind of assume, the Romans, in their emperor worship that they did, they called every first day of the month the Emperor's Day, and so then the early believers, I believe, had started calling the first day of the week then the Lord's Day, probably in reference to the fact that that was when Yeshua rose from the dead. It was on the first day of the week. But there again, that could have been anything from Saturday night, at sunset, all the way up until sometime on what we would call Sunday. So that's what the name of the Lord's Day might have been. Now, don't get this confused with when we start talking about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord would be a day of judgment. So we don't want to confuse those two, the Lord's Day and then a day of judgment. They're not the same thing. Now, Revelation 1 and 11, write what you see in a scroll and send it to Messiah's 7 communities, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamum, to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. Now, these 7 communities, the the word in Greek would have been ecclesia, which we've come to call churches. And if it was in Hebrew, it probably would have been kehilot, as being a kehillah would be an assembly or a congregation. So he's sending them to the Lord's 7 congregations in Asia Minor, and I've shown a similar picture before, but you can kind of get an idea now where these churches are over in the western part of Turkey, and you can see that where they are in relation to modern cities, and then remember that that John was writing from a place, and it was called Patmos, and it would have been down in here someplace in this area, and then you can see, of course, Jerusalem way down here, and Athens, and so forth. This is more of the modern era, and Ankara, Turkey, and Alexandria, Egypt. So you can see all those kind of where it is that we're talking about in these churches. Now, as we go on, I'm going to further expand on the personality of the different churches, their location, some of their history, some of the things that have been written about them. But we got just too much to cover tonight, and I'll cover these things as we go into each church, each community, however you want to call it. I will probably most of the time tonight I'll end up calling it a church, because that's what's most familiar with most of us. We call them the 7 churches in Revelation, and so we'll, whatever words you want to use, church, community, assembly, we're all talking about the same thing: an organization, a congregation. So it said that he wanted John to write it down, write all this stuff down, and to keep a record of what he's seeing there, and then send it to these 7 churches. And why the number 7? Now, we can only speculate, but the number 7 is, of course, the number of completion. And there were other churches in this in the world at that time. These were not the only congregations that were out there. There were other ones, like the city of Colossae, which Paul wrote to the Colossians, but it's not included in this. So why were the 7 chosen? Well, some of it suggested it's because they were arranged in roughly circular pattern. Others have thought that it was because they were postal districts of the Roman province of Asia, and therefore making it easier to get the letter sent and posted around to the different ones. Some people believe that the 7 churches were chosen because in the Bible, the number 7, of course, represents completeness, and these letters and all the book of Revelation were written to the complete church, or the complete organization, if there was such a thing as an organization, say the movement, but the way, the Nazarenes, they call them. So it was written to the entirety of the believers in Yeshua, and So that's some of the ideas that people had of why these 7 churches. Now, some of the people talk about that these churches represent, basically all the aspects of what we would call Christianity today, or the believers. And some people have even said that what it describes the state of the believers and the organization of believers today, because you've got they assign certain attributes to the different congregations, and we'll look more into that as we get into the further chapters in 2 and 3, where the letter is actually written to talks about to the different congregations. Now, it's also interesting that when Paul was writing, he wrote to 7 churches. He wrote to the Rome, Corinth, Galatia, Ephesus, Colossae, Philippi, and Thessalonica. So Paul also wrote to 7 churches. So there is some precedent in that. Now, we'll go ahead with Revelation 12. And then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden minaret. And in the midst of the minaret, I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe down to his feet, with a golden belt wrapped around his chest. All right, now, the voice. What was this voice? You can imagine that the voice that was behind him, perhaps it was a voice that was familiar to him. I don't know, because it wasn't exactly what he remembered Yeshua, but maybe there was a tinge of familiarity to it, because now the Bible says that it was like a trumpet, something that's going to penetrate the air, and a trumpet is a lot of times used as a call to battle. So that's the way John described it, is that it was the sound of a trumpet, piercing and perhaps loud. And yet he knew from the voice's self-description, because the voice said, "I'm the Alpha and the Omega," that it was Yeshua. He just instinctively knew it. So this was John's opportunity to see Yeshua again, after knowing him so well during the years of his earthly ministry. Now, you got to understand now that this may be some 60 years later that John is writing this, and this has been 60 years since the death and resurrection of Yeshua. So it would have been quite a reunion for John. Now, first, it said John didn't see Yeshua. He saw 7 golden lampstands. Now, some people say that these were not candlesticks, but a lampstand. Back in those days, they had a stand, and then they would have had those little pitcher things that I probably should have brought a sample of it, but they're a little bowl-like thing. Picture Aladdin's lamp, okay, where it's got the little part that goes, it's got a handle, and then it has the part that you would actually put a wick in, and the wick would go down into the bowl, and then it would light off from that. So here's possibly, this is one artist rendition of it. There's all sorts of them out there on the net. So but they're showing flames coming up right from a candle, from a holder. That's not, to my mind, is probably not all that accurate. I would look at it as more of a stand, and then you put the lamp on top of it. This is different. Now, there are some people that they talk about this being a menorah. In fact, the translation that I used with the Tree of Life version of the Bible, they call them menorahs. And then there's other writers that, I've read the books, and they said, yes, these were menorahs. So we really don't know whether they were a single light or if they were seven lights, like a menorah would be. But I personally think there's probably just one light for each one. But it is kind of questionable as to what it would have been, whether it was a menorah or just a lampstand. I don't think in the end, in the final analysis, that it makes any difference one way or the other. And we do recall that in the tabernacle they had a 7 branch lamp, and that was called a menorah. And so, like I said, I don't see that it makes any difference whether it was just one light or 7 lights for the purposes of this vision. We don't know, and they didn't really clarify. So one thing about it, the lamp stands, they said that they represented the 7 congregations, that the lampstands themselves did not give off the light. Obviously what they did was they just held the light. They provided a stand to make the light more visible, and it's probably a good picture of our congregations today, or our assemblies, our organizations, that we don't give out the light, we don't produce the light, we should be just simply displaying the light or reflecting the light. So, and said in the midst, now I did want to show you that this imagery, if you think back to Daniel 7 and 10, that was similar imagery. And I went back and I was looking at, let's see, I don't think I did. I was looking at other pictures that I had pulled up for my earlier classes about the Son of Man being in the midst of these lampstands, and they were pretty much, again, the same thing. They were one single lamp rather than a menorah. But there again, I've read several authors, and some of them say yes, they were menorahs, and other people said no, just a lampstand. Really doesn't make any difference one way or the other. But we do know that Yeshua was a glorified. Obviously, his body was different than when he was on the earth. It was completely glorified, I guess, was similar, I think, to the Transfiguration. Now, let's go ahead with the description of his garment. Now, it said that the robe went all the way to his feet. Now, typically, back in those days, a person that had a robe that went all the way down to their feet was probably not a person that did a lot of physical labor. Generally, the men who would be laborers would be wearing a short kind of a toga thing that would go perhaps to their knees or a little bit shorter, so that it would not interfere with their walking and so forth. So that a toga is probably the best description that I can come up with that we would recognize. But that way, when they would say that they would gird up their loins or something, they would take the belt and then pull it up to where pull the robe up between their legs and tie it off, so that then it wouldn't be flapping in the breeze, and they would not be encumbered. But a robe, generally a long to the ground robe, indicated a person that did not do a great deal of physical labor. Therefore, he was possibly a ruler or royalty or a priest. The priest had long robes. So the gold sash then is a reminder of the gold that was on the high priest's robes. If you go back to Exodus 39 and 1 through 5, they had gold woven into the sash and the breastplate, the ephod, and so forth of the priest's clothing. So, but that was just gold woven into it. This was said a golden. This is all gold. A sash, a belt around his chest of gold. It said. So. Here we see that one of the duties of a priest was to go into the holy place in the tabernacle and then later on in the temple and tend to the lamps and to make sure that they had plenty of oil, that the wicks were trimmed and sufficient so that they would burn all day until the next day. And so this is kind of interesting here that here's Yeshua, our high priest, and he's portrayed in the midst of these 7 lampstands, and perhaps inspecting or caring for the lamps, but always helping these lamps, which represented the congregations, to burn brightly before the Lord. So let's go ahead with a description of how John described Yeshua. It said his head and his hair were white like wool, white like snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like polished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came forth a sharp 2-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining at full strength. Now this kind of gives us an image of Yeshua. It's not quite like the image that we see in today's world of the guy with the long hair, the hippy dippy looking guy that you see it, even in the Passion, when that movie that Mel Gibson put out, where they showed Yeshua with shoulder length hair. Well, folks, he didn't have shoulder length hair, because the Bible told the men that they should not shave their head, but that it should be carefully cropped, and then their beards, they would grow beards. But a man's hair was not to be real long. And so we know that Yeshua was sinless, and therefore he obeyed what the Torah said. He would not have had long hair. But somehow, I don't know how it has happened over the years, that artists have depicted the men of the day, Yeshua in particular, as having long hair. Possibly because of the Nazarite vow. I don't know, but I did contact a fairly famous, he's famous on the internet for doing political paintings, and I contacted him. We had a back and forth conversation for several days back a couple of 3 years ago, and I asked him, said, you show these pictures of Yeshua. Why do you always show him with long hair? And he said, well, it's because he was a Nazarite. He had no clue what a Nazarite was. That Yeshua was not a Nazarite. He was a Nazarene. He was from Nazareth. A Nazarite, of course, takes on certain vows that they don't cut their hair, they don't drink wine, and we know for a fact that Yeshua did drink wine, so he could not have been a Nazarite.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist was a Nazarite. Samson was a Nazarite, and in fact, Samson was supposed to be a Nazarite from birth. That even his mother was not to drink any kind of alcohol, and that he was never to have his hair cut from birth. So, and then John the Baptist, of course, was a Nazarite, and then Paul. Later on, he took on a Nazarite vow for a certain length of time to show that he was still Torah observant. So anyway, let's go on with that. His head was like it said, it was white hair, white beard, and so that's kind of a sign of age and wisdom. You know, remember back in Daniel, I believe in the 7th chapter in Daniel, where it talked about the Ancient of Days, and that imagery there was someone with white hair. So that's associated with someone who's very old and wise. So that's one of the images here that we see of Yeshua. Also, the white represents purity. You know, it where we talk about our sins, though they be scarlet, will be white as snow. So that again, white harks back to the idea of purity. Now, he says that his eyes were like a flame of fire, and that fire is often associated with judgment in the scriptures. So Yeshua's eyes displayed the fire of searching and penetrating judgment. His feet were like fine brass, and so I may have these. Maybe I didn't write that down, but you know, fire is connected with judgment. The feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace. That talks about, you know, that speaks of someone who has been through the fires of judgment and has come forth with a refined purity. You know, Yeshua has been through the refiner's fire. He was sinless, and you remember, brass is a metal connected with judgment and sacrifice. The altar and at the tabernacle and also in the temple was made of brass. It's called a brazen altar, and brass is also very strong. And it was the strongest metal that they knew in the ancient world. Of course, later on, they developed iron and steel and so forth. But at the time, brass was the strongest, and it's an emblem of stability and permanence. And so that was the reasoning for the imagery there of brass. It said his voice was like the sound of many waters. That means that Yeshua's voice, it had all the power and majesty of maybe a mighty waterfall or a you know, rapids or something. If you've ever been in places where, you know, white water, or I keep harking back to say Niagara Falls or some of these other big waterfalls, you know, where it's just a deafening roar that you have to shout over it to be heard. And so this is the imagery that John equates here to Yeshua's voice. It said it had in his hand, in his right hand, the 7 leaders of the 7 communities. I say leaders here because you know, because in the word it calls them angels, 7 angels of the 7 congregations, and perhaps it could be speaking of angels and physical angels, and who are assigned to these congregations. But I think in context that it's probably talking about the leaders of the 7 congregations there. Now, in this idea that, you know, he had it in his right hand. Typically, your right hand is the hand of strength, and so it's saying that, you know, Yeshua's got these stars. He's got these churches, these congregations in his right hand, in his hand of strength, and so it's kind of like saying that, yes, he had the whole church, the whole body of Yeshua, the whole body of believers. He had the whole thing in his hands. So don't anyone start singing the he's got the whole world in his hands song here. So I've got you muted anyway. And so out of his it says, out of his mouth came a 2-edged sword. Now a two-edged sword generally would have been a heavy sword. And it would, they could, that way, when somebody's going into battle, they could swing it both ways and it would be just as deadly to, whether it's forward or backward. And or if you just swinging it one way and if it gets dull, you turn it over and start swinging it with the other blade. But anyway, it's a two-edged sword was a sword that it was for battle. And so if and literally, I don't think he literally had a sword. This picture of Yeshua standing there with a big long sword, coming out of his mouth. That'd be kind of weird. But I think what they were talking about is another imagery that you see in Ephesians 6 and 17. It was the Word of God. Remember, they talked about the Word of God being like a two-edged sword that cuts, everything, even cutting away the bone and the marrow. It's the Word of God. He was speaking the Word of God, and that could be cutting. That could be part of His judgment, and just. You get the idea of His Word being a powerful thing that could cut, it could destroy.
And it'd be like separating the chaff from the grain.
Well, it could be like
separating the bone from the marrow.
Yeah, something like that. But it's separating. It's that idea of separating maybe the good from the bad. And so we also see that Yeshua, like I pointed out, he was shining great. He was very, very radiant, and it said his countenance was like the sun shining in all its strength. And it harks back to the transfiguration. Remember that when Yeshua brought Peter, James, and John up there to the Mount of Transfiguration. I think that's Mount Tabor, but when he did that, it just said that he shone. He was very, very bright, and there were with him, of course, Moses and Elijah. So it just said that Yeshua in this instance was shining. And in Matthew 17:2, it says his face shone like the sun. Remember also Moshe when he went up to the Mount Sinai with God, that when he came back, his face was shining so brightly that he had to put a veil across his face just so he wouldn't freak out everybody in the valley down there around the mountain. And they didn't want to have anything to do with it because his face was shining like this big bright something or another, and so it did. It freaked them out, and so they said, stay away from us. So everything in this vision that we see here, it speaks of the strength, the majesty, the authority, and righteousness. There's an impressive difference between this vision of Yeshua and the many weak, almost, I hesitate to use the word, but it is effeminate portrayals of Yeshua seen today. Today you see the pictures of him. He's got fine features. Okay, so really, they take these pictures and they show Yeshua, and he doesn't have some of the features that that we associate with Middle Eastern folks, or I don't know, what does a Jew look like? I don't know, other than people looked at me and said, you look like a Jew. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you got a big nose. And so, yeah, I do. But what did he look like? I don't know. But I know that the Bible describes him in Isaiah. Isaiah described him in 53 too. Said that he had no form or comeliness, meaning he just wasn't a handsome guy. Yeshua was not a handsome particularly. He said there's no beauty in him that we would desire him. He was not a physical specimen, and in fact, they didn't even know when they came to arrest Yeshua in the Garden of Gethsemane. They had no clue what he looked like or who he was. He did not stand out in the crowd, and so I think that's something for us today. To think about that. A lot of people we see it a lot where they try to take on some kind of a physical attribute that shows how holy they are. People, they do it all. They'll dress a certain way, or they'll do their hair up in a certain way, or whatever they do. They're trying to portray themselves as holy. And so Yeshua didn't. He was just a regular looking guy. They didn't even know who he was. And Judas says, all right, I'll go up there and do one of these Middle Eastern kisses, to kiss him on each cheek so that you'll know which one of these guys it is and you can arrest him. So what's that?
Betrayed with a kiss.
Yeah, he's betrayed with a kiss. So, our modern pictures of Yeshua, I don't think just really portray him. I look at him as a guy that he spent a lot of his time outside teaching people. His face would have been sunburned or sun darkened anyway. And his early years, he was a craftsman working in wood and stone. And so he would have, maybe had rough hands, but he was definitely a man's man. And so you think of this, the idea with the long flowing hair and the puppy dog eyes and all of that kind of stuff that you see in some of these paintings is, I think it's kind of bogus. And that this is maybe, of course, now John is seeing him in his glorified body, and it's just totally different even than what he had known. And so some say that, we prefer to see and know Yeshua after the flesh, meaning as a man. But Paul said, even though we have known the Messiah according to the flesh, yet now we know him thus no longer, meaning he has been resurrected, changed to an immortal body, and we just don't see him in that light anymore. So let's go ahead and go on. Now, before we do that, let me open it up, see if anybody's got a question or a comment or something like that before we finish it off. We go ahead and go with the last 4 verses. Any comments? Okay.
The only thing that you were saying the people were afraid of Moses. He came down glowing from seeing the Lord. He was showing a holiness about him, and the people had just made the graven image and worshiping, and so it showed them their sinfulness, and they were terrified because of the difference that they were unworthy.
Sure, there was the comparison between the early, the Israelites, the Hebrews, and Moshe with his shining face would have been a stark comparison between their sinfulness, the darkness of their sin, and then the light of his holiness. So
that's probably the way we will feel also when we see Yeshua face to face. We will feel so unworthy and so awed in his presence because he is so holy.
Could be. And those of you that don't know, that's my wife in the background. It's not a disembodied voice. It's not it's not somebody floating around out there, but she doesn't want me to put her picture on here. So she's just it's just a disembodied voice of my little angel that's back there talking to me. So let's go ahead with the last 4 verses then. All right. Now it's Revelation 17 and 18. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, and the one who lives. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. Moreover, I hold the keys of death and Sheol. All right, now it says, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. You know, that would, yeah, you know, if you turn around and you know, you hear a voice behind you and you turn around and you look and there's this man that is got white hair and a white beard and he's shining like the sun and his eyes are fiery and yeah, I'd probably pass out too. And that's what John said. He just fell out like he was dead. And so, but you know, Yeshua, you know, John had spent 3 years with Yeshua, okay, but it had been 60 years since he had seen him, and so he sees this, and again, John is an old dude at this point. He's mid-90s, and so he just falls out, kind of like, remember, Daniel did the same thing. Daniel was a very old man when he saw that last vision, and when the Lord presented himself to Daniel, again, Daniel, yeah, he passed out too, like he was dead. But you know, Yeshua, what did he do? He reached down and said with his right hand, again, the hand of strength, and he comforted John. And perhaps it was when he touched him like that, it may have been you know, it could have been that Yeshua, I'm speculating here, folks, okay? I'm waxing eloquent in my literariness. And, you know, it could have been that he just put his hand on John's shoulder, maybe like he did 60 years ago, you know, and he would have conversations with John and just put his hand on his shoulder and says, John, this is the way it is. This is what I'm trying to tell you. And he could have done the same sort of thing where John was, okay, I remember that touch. And when he did that, Yeshua says, you know, don't be afraid. Just do not be afraid. And, you know, there was really no reason for him to be afraid other than, yeah, if that happened to me, I'd be scared to death, you know, but I'd probably be thinking of all the things that I've done that I shouldn't have done, and did I ask forgiveness for all those things that I should have done, and that I did that I shouldn't have done, and you know how all that stuff goes. I don't know. Maybe John was thinking the same thing, but just the awesomeness of seeing Yeshua, and then he says, "Don't be afraid, John. Don't be afraid." And he said, "Look, I'm the first and the last." He uses the similar language again that he did with the Alpha and the Omega, and it was he's like the God of all eternity, the Lord of eternity, and the past and the future. And he uses this language, says, who lives and was dead and is alive forevermore. That to me, that sums up the first coming of Yeshua, you know, very, very quickly, but in context of what we're talking about here, very, very nicely. That he lives. He says, I'm alive. I'm alive right now. You remember, I was dead, and then I was resurrected, and I'm going to be alive forevermore, John. So don't worry, don't be afraid. And he says, and not only that, John, I've got the total control of hell and death. Now, you know, the popular picture of Satan these days is that, you know, he's down there and he's got control of Hades or hell or wherever that is and whatever it is, you know, a place of torment. But it said that Yeshua holds the keys of Hades and of death. And so, in other words, who goes and who doesn't, or you know, people that are sent there. The devil can't force anyone into hell, and because Yeshua has total control of everything in heaven and in earth. So we'll continue on the last two verses. Therefore, write down what you have seen and what is and what will happen after these things. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, and the 7 gold minaret, or the lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of Messiah's 7 communities, and the 7 menorahs are the 7 communities. So, and it does. This, like I said before, this version, the Tree of Life version, says menorahs or menorah. And you know, I just noticed that I don't know why they say minaret up here in the 7 golden minaret, and then down at the bottom this says 7 menorahs. Well, minaret would have been plural also. And then it says menorahs, which is more in keeping with an English understanding of what plural is. You know, we add an S to it, and in Hebrew you add an OT to it. So I don't know why they did that, to tell you the truth. Next time I get with some of the guys that did this translation, I just might ask them. So you know, I have been in situations where some of these guys that do these translations for some of the Bibles, like Dr. Michael Rodelnik, I just cornered him one day and says, "Hey, why did you guys say this and or that or the other?" And he says, "Hey, well, I told him the way it should have been from a Jewish standpoint, but," he said, "most of the people in the translation were not Jewish," and he said, I was outvoted, so that's the way it turned out. So anyway, I said, okay, fair enough. All right, it says, write these things, write down what you've seen. Now, this is the second time that John is commanded to write something down. Keep a record. We didn't want this to escape. So, and he gives us a structure of what it is that he's supposed to be writing down. It tells John to, this voice tells John to write down what you have seen, okay, what's been in the past, what you have seen, and what's going on right now, and what it is that you will see now. And it says, and then what will happen after these things. In other words, the future. So he's telling him, okay, I want you to write down then this past, present, and future. All of these different things, so that the full revelation of Yeshua is being told. And so again, he's talking to these 7 churches, remember. And so what Yeshua wanted John to write about things that are going to be happening, and all of the things that, so that people could kind of prepare. And it would, I really wish I could understand a little bit more of the mindset or the context in which these churches, these congregations would have accepted this letter, because I think what happened is that John wrote the letter, wrote this book of Revelation, and then he sent it to the churches, and then they just passed it on down to the next one, and perhaps they made copies so that they could study it, or maybe even John had someone to make copies. But anyway, they wrote it down, and that does give us a structure, because the book of Revelation is arranged in a 3-part structure. It's the things that you've seen. Okay, that's in chapter 1. Okay, the things which are, that's in chapter 2 and 3. And then the things which will take place, had not taken place yet with John, that's in chapters 4 through 22. Now, the 7 stars, looking back at this, the 7 stars, this is, are the angels of the 7 churches. That's probably meaning the leaders, and but it could also mean that God had assigned a heavenly being to overlook each of these congregations. And quite frankly, it would be kind of comforting to know that, okay, the Lord has assigned some angel to kind of look over each one of our congregations and to help us along. But the word, this angel word is in Greek, it's agalos, and it literally means messenger. So it's not a big long leap to say that when he's talking about to the agalos of the 7 churches, the messengers of the 7 churches, meaning their pastors, their leaders. That to me probably makes as much sense, or it's as good as those that think that he's talking about a physical, a literal heavenly being that is in charge of of each congregation. So either way, it's I'm not sure that it makes any difference whether we're talking about that Yeshua is holding these stars, which are the 7 pastors, the 7 leaders, or the 7 angels. It really doesn't matter, because what it is he's got it in his hand, and basically that we don't have to worry as long as we're in Yeshua's hand. We're good to go. The 7 lampstands, of course, we've already talked about that as being the 7 communities, 7 churches, 7 congregations, whatever word you want to use to describe that. And so this this was a spectacular vision, and a lot of people would think, wow, I would love to have some kind of a vision like that. But we can know that the very same Yeshua that John saw, we can know him, and we don't have to have this vision. We can know his purity, his eternal wisdom, his judgment, his eternal searching judgment, his victory. All of these things are aspects that we can experience with the Lord. So I think that when we think of when John he saw this vision, think of where he was. He was on this island of Patmos, and it was such a stark contrast. But both John and the deacon named Stephen saw Yeshua most clearly and gloriously when in the context of suffering for the cause of Yeshua. So that's one of those things that well, okay, you say you want to see Yeshua, but look at John. He was on this island, prison island of Patmos. It was dreadful. And then he saw Yeshua. Stephen saw Yeshua sitting on the right hand of the Father as he was being stoned to death. So maybe we don't want to see that, to be in a situation where we would be stoned or undergoing a terrible tribulation. But anyway, that is the complete, that completes our look at Revelation chapter 1.